Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, November 14, 2025. A new survey of Americans finds 7 in 10 say raising children is now unaffordable. Trump administration prepares to lower tariffs on some food items such as coffee and fruit and announces a new trade deal with Switzerland. Democratic Senator Dick Durbin visits a food bank in Chicago as federal food aid money through the SNAP program is now restarted with the federal government reopened. We'll also hear from Senator Durbin and Republican House Majority Leader Tom Emmer about the fiscal year 2026 funding and health care debates and votes that will be completed in the next few months. President Donald Trump calls for the investigation of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's involvement with former President Bill Clinton, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, Democratic donor Reid Hoffman, and Wall Street firm J.P. Morgan Chase, among others, as Epstein emails mentioning Donald Trump were released this week, and the House will be voting next week on whether to release all of the Epstein files. Maryland's Democratic Governor Wes Moore talks about what Democrats can learn from President Trump's campaigning and governing style. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth personally hangs a new plaque at a Pentagon entrance that reads, Department of War. That and more coming up on Washington Today. President Donald Trump writing on Truth Social today, cost and inflation were far higher under sleepy Joe Biden administration than they are now. In fact, costs under the Trump administration are tumbling down, helped greatly by gasoline and energy. Affordability is a lie when used by the Dems. It is a complete con job. Thanksgiving costs are 25% lower this year than last under Crooked Joe. We are the party of affordability. That post from President Donald Trump. Americans' views of the economy were part of the American Family Survey released today by Brigham Young University's Wheatley Institute and its Center for the Study of Elections and Democracy, along with the Deseret News. BYU professor Chris Karpowitz was one of the presenters at the Brookings Institution in Washington.
Back in 2015, a majority disagreed with that idea that children are affordable to raise in the United States today. Concern about that has been increasing over the years. And this year we saw the single biggest increase in concern, a jump of about 13 percentage points. And so now 7 in 10 Americans tell us that they are concerned about the affordability of children, that they don't think it's affordable to raise children today. We see this concern about affordability in other questions. We gave our respondents a set of 15 potential challenges that families might face and asked them to choose for us the top 3. You can see that nearly half chose the costs associated with raising a family as the single biggest challenge affecting families generally in the United States. That outpaces every other concern by quite a bit. If we lump all of those sort of economic concerns together, it's almost 3/4 of Americans who choose an economic concern as one of their top 3 concerns. Interestingly enough, I think Allison will talk more about this, but when we ask people to tell us their top concerns about their family individually, the one that's at the top is mental or physical health struggles. But second, for their own individual families, is the costs associated with raising a family. And when we ask about their own individual families, economic concerns are, again, the most predominant concern. And when they think about their own individual families, there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans. Both, when they think about their individual families, are really concerned about economic issues. You can see that when we think about families generally, concern has been increasing over time, increasing just in the last couple of years. Interestingly enough, the highest rate of increase is among those with high incomes, so incomes above $80,000. When we ask how worried people are about different things that might affect their family finances in the coming year, a majority of Americans say they are very worried about inflation. Second, about 4 in 10 Americans are worried about rising taxes and tariffs. Interestingly enough, most Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, think that international trade, free trade, is a good thing for American families. And so they do worry about taxes and tariffs as well. But inflation is the biggest concern. Now, the specific groups who are concerned about inflation, and this is a finding that won't surprise any political scientists, changes with the party in the White House. So last year it was 70% of Republicans who were very worried about inflation. This year it's 38% of Republicans. Last year it was 40% of Democrats who were very worried. This year it's 64%. So those have just flipped. As control of the White House has flipped.
Chris Karpowitz, BYU political science professor at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., on the release of their American Family Survey. This year's survey also found for the first time in its 11-year history, Americans said finances were the top reason they limited or planned to limit the size of their family. And the Deseret News, which did the survey along with BYU, writing about Americans' views on technology, Americans have relatively straightforward views on how two types of technology affect children, per survey results. They are extremely concerned about online pornography and are least somewhat concerned about social media. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer says the United States and Switzerland have reached a trade deal, with tariffs reduced to 15% and Switzerland pledging to invest $200 billion in the U.S. by the end of 2028. Jamieson Greer spoke to reporters outside the White House about this deal and also promises from the Trump administration that tariffs on specific food products will be lowered soon.
Tell us what you can about the Swiss deal, please.
Yeah, sure. So we've been negotiating with the Swiss for some time. As you know, the Swiss are in quite a unique position, I would say, for a country of their size, population-wise. The size of their trade surplus with the United States is quite significant, and so we've really been, wrestling over, the past several months with the Swiss on how to eliminate this trade deficit. Remember, that's the basis for the entire tariff program, and so working with the Swiss, what we've done is we've identified the areas and the reasons why we have a big deficit with them in goods, and it really boils down to things like pharmaceuticals, gold, right, trade in gold, and a handful of other things. And so the Swiss, as part of their agreement, they've said we are going to have $200 billion in investment, during President Trump's term, starting with about $70 billion investment next year, and it will be in these areas. So Roche, for example, sign of goodwill, has already broken ground on a new facility, pharmaceutical facilities. We have a handful of other Swiss pharmaceutical manufacturers who have made commitments. We have Stadler that does railway equipment. They've made a commitment. Some of these companies already have a U.S. presence and they're expanding, or they're having new facilities. Switzerland, they actually buy a lot of Boeings. They're going to buy some more, of course. But they often will take delivery of those Boeings in other countries, and so they're in some ways they're not getting credit in their trade numbers for those Boeings. They'll take delivery in Switzerland is my guess. And with respect to gold, there's a lot of gold smelting that goes on in Switzerland, and there's at least one Swiss company that has committed to put their gold smelting operation right here in the United States, which makes sense for a lot of reasons. So we expect by the end of President Trump's term for that trade deficit with Switzerland to be eliminated because of these kinds of moves. And also, more importantly, there's going to be a structural opening of Switzerland to the United States. Switzerland, on the industrial side, already has fairly low tariffs, but they've agreed to remove all industrial tariffs. They've agreed to give us market access for things like poultry, which is really challenging for the U.S. and Europe. And so it's actually quite an important development that Switzerland's willing to do that. And of course, they'll give us access on pork and beef and seafood and a variety of other products that we make. So it's an exciting opportunity. We expect that the Swiss will have a tariff rate similar to what the EU has, a 15% rate all in. And again, with all of these things, we're going to keep monitoring this. If these companies don't deliver on their promises or their commitments, or the trade deficits get out of hand, we'll have to adjust it. But the Swiss have shown enormous good faith at this point in acknowledging the significance of the trade deficit and how to eliminate it.
Just for specificity, you say all in. So if an MFN rate would push something up, it would be 15.
That's right. The higher 15% or MFN. That's right.
Okay. And can I ask also about forthcoming reductions on food tariffs? Secretary
Sure.
Hegseth has talked about that. The NEC director has talked about that. What categories are we looking at, and when can we expect those?
Sure. So this is primarily, food and agriculture products that we simply don't make in the United States. And on April 2nd, the president already on April 2nd had some items where he didn't impose tariffs. And then in early September, he put out a notice where he said, as we proceed in negotiations and close framework agreements and trade deals, we're going to release tariffs on a lot of these things that aren't made. And there's a full annex, right? So if you go back to September 5th, everyone can see this annex of stuff. So it's no secret. And now, with the deals from the summer with the EU and the UK, the president's successful swing through Asia, where we closed some full agreements, have some additional frameworks, have the investment agreements finalized with Japan and Korea. And now, yesterday, with the announcement of part of our Western Hemisphere strategy, with 4 agreements with Latin American countries, and today with Switzerland, we've really reached that critical mass where we've started to reshape the global trade system in a way that we think is better for America. And so now is the right time to release some of these items that the president said he was going to release. And when you look at Southeast Asia and South America, that's where we get a lot of this stuff. The coffee, the cocoa, the bananas, those kinds of things. So this is a natural outgrowth of exactly what the president signaled, and that's what he's doing today. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
U.S. Trade Representative Jamison Greer speaking to reporters outside the White House. ABC News writing about the food tariff relief the Trump administration is preparing to announce. According to data from the September 2025 Consumer Price Index, coffee prices have spiked 18.9%, bananas are up 6.9%, and beef prices are up 14.7% in the past year. Economists have attributed some of the price increases for coffee and bananas to President Trump's tariffs. These are products that the U.S. does not produce in large quantities and relies on imports from other countries. From Axios, the Trump administration directed states on Thursday to take immediate steps to ensure households receive full November SNAP benefits, but it could take a week or longer to actually do so, some local SNAP offices told Axios. The shutdown's disruption to SNAP has created turmoil for the millions of Americans enrolled in the program, many of whom are still stuck waiting to access their delayed payments. Spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Agriculture told Axios on Friday, as soon as President Trump signed the bill to reopen the government, money was flowing to states. USDA stands ready to provide technical assistance if states are struggling to get benefits to families. Part of the reporting from Axios. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, stopped by a food bank in Chicago today to talk about SNAP and the economy, and also his joining 7 other Senate Democrats to vote to reopen the government earlier this week, when most Democrats voted no.
This stop at this food depository is one that is timely for so many reasons, as Greg mentioned to you. It isn't just a question as to whether or not people need food. They needed it long before the events of this year. But it's become even worse with inflation continuing to grow, taking any of the things that they distribute out of the reach of families with limited resources. It also is a situation with the government shutdown where there was a question about SNAP, also known as food stamps, and a program in its future. Well, we think that's resolved now, and I hope it is. As a result of the decisions that were made this last week in Washington, we're going to move forward with funding SNAP to a higher level than was in the previous year. The same thing with the WIC program and a number of other critical programs are concerned. I think that's important. We can have our political debates in Washington, but it shouldn't be at the expense of families receiving paychecks and feeding their children. So I want to thank this organization here for the work that they do in the community, and I will continue to work to make sure that ICE leaves Chicago once and for all. Questions?
Senator, you got a lot of heat for your decision to join with the other 7 senators in coming to this compromise. Do you have any regrets about that? And do you think that changed any thinking in yours?
Well, I can tell you it changed a lot of things. As a result of our compromise, we ended up with a commitment to pass 3 major appropriation bills. That was not on the table before we got into debate. And they included SNAP and WIC, veterans programs, and so many others, critical programs that are needed. We have to do more. And there's been a commitment, verbal commitment from the Republicans in the Senate that they'll work with us on appropriation bills. That's the way it should be done. This temporary spending measure or shutdown is a crude and sometimes cruel approach to federal programs. We can do better.
What about, I'm sorry, just one follow-up. Sure. What about the ACA? Where does that leave things with the ACA?
Well, the good news is there's a commitment from John Thune, the Republican leader in the Senate, for us to bring a Democratic written bill to the floor before the middle of December, just a matter of a few weeks, and so we can have a debate. What we're doing now, what I'm doing and the other members, is trying to round up Republican support for this. This health care issue is a critical issue that needs to be resolved. We need to extend the tax credit for at least a year, I hope even longer, and make some positive changes in the program. I cannot imagine trying to cope with medical challenges in a family without health insurance. I was there at one point in my own life, my family life. I'd never want to be there again.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, at a food bank in Chicago. And from Politico, the Trump administration will require millions of low-income people to reapply for food stamps as part of an effort to crack down on fraud, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins said. Rollins told Newsmax on Thursday that she plans to have everyone reapply for their benefits, make sure that everyone that's getting a taxpayer-funded benefit through food stamps, that they literally are vulnerable and they can't survive without it. SNAP serves nearly 42 million Americans and costs roughly $100 billion in fiscal year 2024. That was from Politico. U.S. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, Republican from Minnesota, says that he would like to see Congress pass the remaining fiscal year 2026 spending bills by Christmas and not bump up against the January 30th deadline that's in the continuing resolution, or CR, that reopened the government this week. Congressman Emmer was on the Punchbowl News podcast Fly Out Thursday.
The government shuts down in 78 days again, which is not that far in the future, because you're out for Thanksgiving, you're out for the holiday season in December. You have to pass another 9 appropriations bills in that time frame. What is your biggest challenge going into that process?
I think you just hit it. It's the calendar.
Yeah,
that's the biggest challenge. The good news is the appropriators, the Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate, you know this, Jake, because sorry.
You know what? I'm named after someone named Jack.
Well,
so
I got a Jack in my family and I got a brother, but that isn't why. It's just early in the morning.
It's early, yep.
The tongue's not working completely. You know that because you talk to all these guys, they have been communicating since this shutdown started. They've been talking about where they have points of disagreement.
The appropriators, I mean.
Yeah, and so they told us that those first 3 bills were essentially ready to go. Clearly they were. They would have been done back in September had we actually kept the government working for the purpose that we're supposed to be here. Unfortunately, politics on the left, I believe, got in the way. Now they tell us there's another 3, perhaps even 6 that are pretty close to being done. Yeah, there are going to be bumps along the way because Republicans and Democrats don't agree on all these things. Yeah. But we know, our people know they got to get at least 7 Democrats in the Senate.
Right.
So they're going to work together, and their goal is to get the entire budget done. I would like to see us getting it done around Christmas rather than waiting till January, but we'll see.
You think you want to get all 9 of these appropriations bills done this calendar year?
I would love to see that done. Are you kidding?
Yep.
Is the whip? Do you really want me to be working at the end of January trying to find those last few votes? I'd rather be doing that right at the end of the year and get it done.
House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, Republican from Minnesota, on the Punchbowl News podcast Fly Out Thursday, posted Thursday. Wall Street today, the Dow down 309, NASDAQ up 30, S&P down 3. WLS-TV in Chicago writing that 21 people were arrested and 4 police officers were injured Friday as protesters clashed with police outside a Broadview U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility. It was the largest crowd seen in Broadview in recent weeks. Members from the faith community were leading hundreds of people in the anti-ICE protest. Counter-protesters were also present. That was from WLS-TV in Chicago. In Washington, outside the White House, U.S. Border Czar Tom Homan questioned about this.
Any more on the protest outside of the Broadview facility? Any more on the protest outside of the
Look, they got the right to protest. Have at it. But don't cross the line. I was watching the videos before I came out here. When they put hands on a law enforcement officer, they're getting arrested going to jail. They have a right to protest, but don't cross the line. I mean, if people would just look at the data, the way it reads, that what ICE is doing, the vast majority of public safety threats, I know some of you here say that's not true because they're not criminals, cannot convict you. If we arrest somebody in the county jail or state prison that has a criminal conviction, well, it's not, a DUI. Like I read one report says, well, a lot of these are DUIs. That's really not a crime. Really? 12,000 people a year die from DUIs. I consider that a significant public safety threat. But then they say, well, some of these aren't convicted. Well, we arrest them in a county jail. They're in jail, locked in a jail cell because they're arrested for a crime. We consider those convicted and those pending criminal charges criminals. But you got a lot of the media saying, well, most of the people in ICE detention aren't a criminal. Wrong. I look at the data this morning. More than half are criminals. And as far as what we're arresting, it hovers around 64 to 70% are criminals. And who are the others, 30%, which the media ignores? A lot of them are national security threats. Most national security threats don't have a criminal history. We arrested several thousand Iraqi nationals. Most of them don't have a criminal history. Why is that? Because they're laying low to do whatever they want to do. A lot of them are gang members. A lot of gang members don't have criminal history. And like I said, a lot of them are fugitives. Those who had due process were orderly moved and went and win. Yeah, we're arresting them. But we're the most non-fugitive, non-criminals, non-public safety threat, non-national security threats. Where do most of them get arrested? Sanctuary cities. Because rather than giving us the bad guy in the safety and security of a jail, they release them in the community. We go in the community and find them. When we find them, many times they're with others. Others in the United States illegally. Well, guess what? They're going to get arrested too. They're in the country legally. It's not okay to be in the country legally. It's not okay to enter the country legally. It's a crime. And the message we're not going to send, come here illegally, just don't commit another crime and you're safe, not the message we're going to send. That's why we had the most secure border in lifetime in the history of this nation. Not only that, let's not forget, it's just not about immigration. It's just not about a secure community. The stronger the border is, the stronger our national security is, because we now have a pretty good handle on who's coming in, what's coming in, where it's coming in, why it's coming in, which didn't happen in the 4 years of the Biden administration. 2.1 million gotaways, biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen.
Border czar Tom Homan with reporters outside the White House today. Chicago Sun-Times reporting that a federal judge on Wednesday said he plans to grant bond to hundreds of immigrants whose arrests during Operation Midway Blitz are being challenged under a consent decree that limits so-called warrantless arrests that occur without a prior warrant or probable cause. And Thursday night, the U.S. Justice Department appealed and sought a stay to the judge's order. This is Washington Today. The Independent newspaper writing that President Donald Trump responded to the latest trove of emails sent by Jeffrey Epstein with an all-caps Truth Social post, the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Trump's Friday morning post included a clip of Fox News host Jesse Waters claiming, "We've been combing through them and can't find anything nailing Trump." A number of emails mentioned Trump, who has not been accused of any wrongdoing, including one in which the disgraced financier claimed Trump knew about the girls. That was from The Independent. A U.S. House discharge petition to bring up a bill to require the release of all files related to the federal investigation of the late sex offender and accused trafficker Jeffrey Epstein has reached the required majority of members, 218. And that's with a combination of all Democrats and 4 Republicans. House Speaker Mike Johnson said a vote on the bill will happen next week. The speaker was interviewed today on the Fox Business Channel.
We put a UC on the floor, a unanimous consent to just dispense with the discharge petition, just get it passed by everyone. The Democrats objected to it on the floor. I did that. I put that on the floor. They objected to it. If they were really about transparency and honesty and they had this great urgency about it, they would have voted to let that be done. It has never been about that. It's been about politics. They're trying to attack the president. They're trying to manufacture some sort of hoax that he had something to do with Epstein, and it is absurd. This has been going on way too long. Look, if they cared so much about the victims of Epstein, why didn't any of these Democrats who are howling and screaming and all the media types, why didn't they go for the files during the 4 years of the Biden administration? The Biden DOJ had every single one of these documents, and they never did a darn thing about it. You never heard any of these people say a word about it. They don't care about that. They care about going after Donald Trump because they have Trump derangement syndrome. It's very real, and it sort of encompasses all of Washington.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, on the Fox Business Channel today. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, was on CNN today on the Epstein files.
It's my expectation that the legislation will pass, potentially pass decisively. Democrats in the House, of course, will strongly support it. We believe in transparency. We believe it's been far too long that this information has been hidden from the American people. And it's extraordinary that rather than focus on trying to actually extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, drive down the high cost of living, or make life better for the American people, Donald Trump and his folks have spent this week pressuring Republicans not to back the effort to release these Jeffrey Epstein files to the American people.
Now, this week, Republican Congressman Tim Burchett, once it was clear that the discharge petition would get enough votes, Tim Burchett tried to actually get a vote on the House floor this week. And through House procedures, apparently it would have required leadership on both sides to sign on. House Speaker Mike Johnson says you wouldn't sign on to having a vote this week. Why not?
Yeah, that's actually inaccurate. It appears to me Mike Johnson didn't reach out. He spent 7 weeks stopping Representative Adelita Grijalva from being sworn in. And the reason why they were on vacation, a taxpayer-funded vacation for 7 weeks, is because they had no answers for the American people on the health care crisis that Republicans have created, and they were unwilling to swear in Representative Adelita Grijalva because they knew she would be the 218th signature to trigger this up or down vote. So I have no idea what Mike Johnson is talking about.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, on CNN. President Trump writing on Truth Social today, now that the Democrats are using the Epstein hoax involving Democrats and not Republicans to try and deflect from their disastrous shutdown and all of their other failures, I will be asking Attorney General Pam Bondi and the Justice Department, together with our great patriots at the FBI, to investigate Jeffrey Epstein's involvement and relationship with Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, J.P. Morgan, Chase, and many other people and institutions to determine what was going on with them and him. This is another Russia scam with all arrows pointing to the Democrats. Records show that these men and many others spent large portions of their life with Epstein and on his island. Stay tuned. That was the post from President Trump on Truth Social. Attorney General Pam Bondi responding on X. Thank you, Mr. President. SDNY U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton is one of the most capable and trusted prosecutors in the country, and I've asked him to take the lead. As with all matters, the department will pursue this with urgency and integrity to deliver answers to the American people. From the New York Times, Representative Eric Swalwell, one of President Trump's most vocal critics in the House, said on Thursday that he was being targeted by the Trump administration after news reports that he had been referred to the Justice Department for a potential criminal investigation. An accusation that Mr. Swalwell, Democrat of California, had committed mortgage and tax fraud was made on Wednesday by the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Bill Pulte. According to the news reports, Mr. Pulte, a Trump appointee, has made similar allegations against the president's other perceived enemies. Reporting from the New York Times, Congressman Swalwell was interviewed Thursday night on MSNBC.
These allegations are false, just like the allegations against Adam Schiff are false, and Letitia James are false, and Lisa Cook are false. And a spoiler alert for you, there will be allegations next week against somebody that'll be false. No, the Justice Department has not said anything just through leaked media reporting. But this is really about Donald Trump going after his political enemies, and no one has been a more vocal critic than me. And as you mentioned, I have one of the only remaining lawsuits against Donald Trump for his role on January 6th. I don't wake up every day going to work to fight Donald Trump. I fight for Californians. He just happens to get in the way. And if he thinks for 1 second that me or Adam Schiff or Tish James or Lisa Cook are going to back down or hide under the bed or shrink, he is wrong.
I think if we could, we have from the Wall Street Journal reporting, Congressman, that I think the context here is important to bring up, that just from 48 hours ago, a report in which Fannie Mae watchdogs were removed from their jobs who had been probing to see whether Trump appointee Bill Pulte had improperly obtained mortgage records of key Democratic officials, including New York Attorney General Letitia James, according to people familiar with the matter. Fannie's Ethics and Investigations Group had received internal complaints alleging senior officials had improperly directed staff to access the mortgage documents of James and others, according to the People. It was 2 months ago, I recall, when Bill Pulte, who is the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, made his first referrals as it pertained to Adam Schiff and Letitia James to the Department of Justice. That is what, to our understanding, has taken place today. Could you be specific when, as we wait to see if the Department of Justice seeks to take this up in a panel, a grand jury, when folks ask you about the specific allegations of a double primary residence, what do you say about your situation?
Yeah, I only have one mortgage and a residence in California, and I spend my time every week between California and Washington, D.C. This is, again, just Donald Trump doing everything he can to target his enemies. In our lawsuit, it's not lost on me that we've begun to depose members of the administration. And so you can connect the dots there if you will. But this is why being in the majority also matters, because these guys think that they can do this because they're invincible and there are no consequences. And a year from now, we are going to win the majority. And that's what we learned last Tuesday when California voters stood up against Donald Trump. And when we're in the majority, we will have subpoena power and accountability will happen. So Bill Pulte and any other lawless official who is carrying out these political prosecutions on behalf of Donald Trump, they should familiarize themselves with the Judiciary Committee room, because they're going to be spending a lot of time there answering questions. And I sure hope everything they did was above board.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, Democrat of California, on MSNBC Thursday night. Another New York Times article today, the Georgia criminal election interference case against President Trump and a number of his allies entered a new phase on Friday as the executive director of the state's prosecutor council appointed himself to take over the case, replacing Fani T. Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney, who was disqualified from pursuing it. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Today on C-SPAN's Ceasefire, at a time when finding common ground matters most in Washington, former Alabama Democratic Senator Doug Jones and former Ohio Republican Congressman Steve Stivers come together for a bipartisan dialogue on the shutdown and top issues facing the country. They join host Dasha Burns.
Bridging the divide in American politics.
Watch Ceasefire today at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and Pacific only on C-SPAN.
And if you miss an episode, you can find Ceasefire as a podcast at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. NBC News reported this week that President Donald Trump's directive to change the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War could cost as much as $2 billion. According to 6 people with knowledge of the potential cost. The name change, which must be approved by Congress, would require replacing thousands of signs, placards, letterheads, and badges, as well as any other items at U.S. military sites around the world that feature the Department of Defense name. According to 2 senior Republican congressional staffers, 2 senior Democratic congressional staffers, and 2 other people briefed on the potential cost. One of the biggest contributors to the cost of changing the name would be rewriting digital code for all of the department's internal and external-facing websites, as well as other computer software on classified and unclassified systems, the 4 senior congressional staffers said. That was from NBC News. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Thursday posted a video of himself putting in the final screws on a new 60-pound bronze plaque that read Department of War. It was at the Pentagon entrance where international dignitaries are greeted.
There we go. Thank you very much. So the previous sign, Department of Defense, from what I'm told, was here for 76 years. And that's a long time. 76 years is a long time. But when you think of the length of our republic, 250 years, the original name of this department was the Department of War. George Washington saw it as the Department of War, all the way until World War II. And so when this building was built after World War II and the sign went up, it's the Department of Defense. It's the sign that I walked past on my first day, that foreign leaders walk past. It's the first thing you see. And we wanted to replace this because we want everyone that comes through this door to know that we're deadly serious about the name change of this organization. That, yes, we love everything that the Department of Defense represented, but this is a new era of the Department of War that is focused on winning wars, not just perpetually defending, making sure we know exactly what the mission is and that the troops are sent there to succeed and win. So the Department of War has a new ethos. We're rebuilding it. We're reestablishing deterrence. It's based on America first and peace through strength and common sense. And now everyone that enters this building whether it's generals or civilians or foreign leaders, is going to see, hey, this is not just on paper, this is not just the title, this is exactly who we are. And we urge Congress next year to make it permanent. And we think there are plenty of senators and congressmen out there that support the president's vision to make it permanently the Department of War, reestablishing it back to Henry Knox and George Washington and the founding of our nation, that we will fight and win our nation's wars if called upon. But of course, the whole goal is to deter wars in the first place, is to establish peace. So thank you for hooking us up. Thank you. Putting us up there. It means a lot to us. I'll look at it every time we come in. We hope our adversaries and allies alike look at it when they walk in this beautiful building as well. So gentlemen, thanks a lot. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. Thank you. Outstanding. Thank you very much. All right. Beautiful.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in a video on Thursday at a Pentagon entrance. A U.S. proposal to provide a United Nations mandate for an international stabilization force in Gaza is facing opposition from Russia, China, and some Arab countries, which have expressed unease about a yet-to-be-established board that would temporarily govern the territory and the lack of any transitional role for the Palestinian Authority. That's how an AP story begins. It goes on, the Chinese and Russians, two veto-wielding members of the UN Security Council, have called for the Board of Peace under President Trump's ceasefire plan to be removed from the resolution entirely, according to 4 UN diplomats briefed on the matter, who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss ongoing negotiations. There was a question about this today to Craig McIver, international human rights lawyer and former United Nations senior human rights advisor, from activist Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, at a Jerusalem Fund discussion in Washington about the Israel-Hamas war and ceasefire.
I'm very worried about what's happening at the UN now, and I want to thank you for your work on trying to promote a consent-based protection force, but it doesn't seem to be on the table. And so between what the US and the French and Saudis are calling for, is it possible that China and Russia will veto both of those, and will that be a good thing? And what can we as the grassroots be pushing now?
Well, that's our hope at the moment, is that either the Russians or the Chinese or both will block what the United States is trying to do. Where the negotiations will go after that, I don't know. You know, there have been 3 tracks in this process so far. The first track to come up was this movement, first by Palestinian civil society and then by global civil society, to get the General Assembly to convene under the Uniting for Peace mechanism, to adopt a resolution that would have a number of accountability measures for the Israeli regime, including rejection of its credentials, as was done with South Africa, including military embargo, including a whole range of accountability measures, sanctions that could be adopted by the General Assembly, could not be enforced by the General Assembly, but they could be adopted and then provide a platform for other countries to come on board and to implement those sanctions. And then to mandate a protection force on the model of what was done in 1956 under Uniting for Peace in the UN emergency force that deployed to the Sinai. This is something for which there's precedent, it's legal, it's possible. There's a draft resolution, there's a principal sponsor in the government of Colombia. But as you can see, the minute Colombia stepped up to do this, President Petro fell under the attack of the U.S. government, which first, pulled his visa and then began threatening him with everything from sanctions to tariffs to coup d'etat to an invasion to, you name it. That set that process back. And in the meantime, Israel's friends and the U.S. friends have been moving forward on this French-Saudi plan and on the Trump plan, which they are now trying to find a way to merge, which is nothing more than a colonial grab by Donald Trump, Tony Blair, and other discredited international figures to further deny the self-determination of the Palestinian people, to further normalize the Israeli regime, and to further, let's say, cage the Palestinian people in Gaza and to put them back in the situation where they have to beg the Americans and the Israelis for any crumbs that are thrown to them. This would be a complete reversal of everything that's happened in the last 2 years in the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the UN human rights mechanisms, and global civil society demanding accountability and saying, the court has said that the Palestinian people do not have to negotiate for their rights, that these rights are inalienable, and that Israel has to be held accountable.
Craig McIver, international human rights lawyer, former UN senior human rights advisor, at today's Jerusalem Fund conference in Washington that was titled Gaza Genocide Year 3. Wall Street Journal writing that Israeli settlers extended a wave of attacks in the West Bank, burning a mosque on Thursday and setting upon Israeli troops during a separate incident earlier in the week, drawing rare condemnation from authorities and concern from Washington over the escalating violence. The Palestinian Religious Affairs Ministry shared photographs of the aftermath of the mosque attack on social media, showing damage to a prayer hall where windows appeared to be blown out and ash was strewn over part of the floor. Hateful messages promising revenge were spray-painted in Hebrew on the outside of the building, the photographs showed. That was from the Wall Street Journal. Israeli government spokesperson Shosh Bedrosian addressed the reports during an online news conference on Thursday.
Alexander Cornwell from Reuters. All right, this is a very lengthy question. U.S. Secretary of State last night expressed concern about the recent wave of settler violence in the West Bank. Overnight, Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir condemned recent settler attacks, according to Israeli police. 3 of the 4 individuals were arrested on Tuesday. Does the government unequivocally condemn acts of violence committed by Israeli citizens against Palestinians in the West Bank? So let me tell you this on Judea and Samaria. Any incidents of lawlessness are dealt with to the full extent of the law. The IDF operates under strict ethical guidelines and international law in Judea and Samaria. Commander of the Central Command made it clear that the IDF does not accept any situation in which lawbreakers harm property and civilians. Jewish communities are under attack, and they are oftentimes conveniently overlooked in the media. Israel has experienced a wave of terror perpetrated by individuals, many of them very young, inspired by vicious incitement in Palestinian social and traditional media, urged on by the Palestinian leadership. The Palestinian Authority systematically rewards people for attacking and terrorizing Jews, and the more serious offenses, the more money they receive. The abhorrent Pay for Slay initiative by the PA has continued, and the policy must stop, as it drives and it fuels terror against Jews. Now, as part of the ceasefire, Israel released 250 Palestinian terrorists serving life sentences. The PA paid these same terrorists, many of them from Hamas, and they have made a collective of $70 million. 9 major attacks took place in September, 8 in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria region, and one side, Israel. The security services were able to foil 105 major terror attacks. 9 people were killed and 24 injured in the September terror attacks. I'd also like to point to you more information on the ground. When it comes to terrorism from Judea and Samaria, I can tell you that Israel's policy is that there will be no safe haven for terrorists in Judea and Samaria. The IDF and our security services continue to operate vigorously to foil terror attack activity in the region, and we will reach anyone who harms the state of Israel and its citizens and our soldiers. The terrorism against Israeli citizens is the result of ongoing incitement directed by Iran and Hamas, encouraging attacks against civilians and their murder and attempting to ignite additional arenas. Let's also bring everyone up to speed about the events of today that came out. Let's talk about the reality. Shin Bet and IDF announced today with the Israeli police that they dismantled a Hamas terrorist stronghold where terrorists operated in the Bethlehem area, planning to carry out shooting attacks against security forces and Israeli civilians. More than 50 terrorists were apprehended in 15 different operations that took place. One of the terrorist cells was in advanced stages of operational readiness, preparing to carry out attacks within the immediate time frame. Now, thwarting this type of terrorism prevented significant terror attacks from happening, which could have had a devastating toll on our soldiers and our citizens.
Israeli government spokesperson Shosh Bedrosian in a news conference Thursday. Times of Israel reporting that U.S. President Donald Trump will host the Israeli hostages released in last month's Gaza ceasefire deal at the White House on Thursday, November 20th. A source familiar with the matter tells the Times of Israel. This is Washington Today. And as we finish, we return to U.S. politics. Maryland Governor Wes Moore talking about what his Democratic Party can learn from Republican President Donald Trump when it comes to style and strategy, making your priorities and agenda real policy. Governor Moore was interviewed by Chuck Todd, journalist and podcast host, at the Texas Tribune Festival in Austin.
He's won 2 terms for president. What does he do? What does he do well that has allowed him to get elected twice? Have you learned anything from him?
No, absolutely. And listen, I think we can spend all night long talking about the dangers of what he is doing and how we literally have a president of the United States who is using the Constitution like it's a suggestion box.
I wish he did use it as a suggestion box, actually.
He should take more suggestions. Yes. But we would also be foolish not to acknowledge the speed in which he moves. Where, I think about it this way, where
he doesn't care about institutions and whether they have to write their own version of the memo before you get to implement your plan, right?
Like oftentimes, everything from Democrats is like an 8-year research paper.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, let's do another analysis of the analysis that we concluded of the last analysis.
You need to make sure to approve a committee to do that analysis, by the way.
Donald Trump did not need a 2-year commission to decide he was going to start a trade war. Donald Trump did not need a 4-year analysis to decide that he was going to break the law and kick children off of SNAP. Donald Trump did not need a 18-person commission to decide that he was going to take parts of the Constitution and literally pick and choose which judges' orders he would follow and not. And I just think that the Democratic Party has got to stop being the party of no and slow and start being the party of yes and now. I think the Democratic Party have got to start moving faster. I think the Democratic Party have got to start being more deliberate. I think the Democratic Party has got to stop making everything a 10th grade debate club research paper. And I just believe that, there's something that we do understand that he actually does, that he moves with a level of speed. And frankly, Donald Trump is a fantastic vessel for the frustration. He's someone who's going to tell you what's wrong with it. He's someone who's going to tell you who broke it, who's to blame for it, and why he alone can fix it, right? Donald Trump is a vessel for the frustration, but he's not a vehicle for the solution. I think the answer that the Democrats have got to do is we've got to start being the vehicle for the solution and stop pretending like these problems are not problems. Because if we start moving with a sense of speed to address the issue, that if our solutions actually match the speed in which people's lives are falling apart, then you're not going to have election problems anymore. But that's the thing that I think we've got to learn from him.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore with journalist Chuck Todd at the Texas Tribune Festival in Austin. Governor Moore also said in the conversation that Maryland will press ahead with congressional redistricting to try to flip the one Republican U.S. House seat currently in the state to help counter similar Republican redistricting in other states. The governor said if parts of this country are going to go through a mid-decade process to determine whether or not they have fair maps, then so will the state of Maryland. Donald Trump is not going to choose what our democracy looks like. The people of Maryland will choose what our democracy looks like. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. And before we go, a reminder, tonight, a new C-SPAN ceasefire program airs at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern. This week, host Dasha Burns will have a conversation with former Alabama Democratic Senator Doug Jones and former Ohio Republican Congressman Steve Stivers. C-SPAN's ceasefire tonight at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern. Also available as a podcast. Have a good night and weekend.